This video is now in session, and I've waited for a very long time to make this video. I didn't have much reason as to why I waited so long, but I think today is the time that we're going to talk about it, how Alaska is turning more democratic. Now, I will be posting within maybe a few months a very in-depth article going on about how Alaska is turning democratic, but I guess this video is like a foreplay into that article of what I want to talk about and how Alaska is turning, I mean, not necessarily democratic, but I guess more turning purple and purplish and more gray. So if we look at this political article right here, you should go read it. It's called How to Turn a Red State Purple, Democrats Not Required. And it shows how a lot of independents in Alaska are turning a Republican state, that is Alaska, to a blue state, or at the very least a gray state. So there are just a few political operatives here that are going against the Republican Party in Alaska, but these groups are very, very shrewd, I guess, in how they get individuals to run for office, who to coalesce around with in certain places. And it started mainly off of this person named Jonathan Christ Tompkins. Now, he, I believe, was from Yale and was from that area before he moved over to Alaska. It's a very odd story as to how he went over to Alaska, but ultimately he moved to Sitka, which, if you don't know, it's like the southern region of Alaska. It's a wonderful place to be at. It's around this area, like Electoral District 35. So, Jonathan Christ Tompkins came in here and he ran for office. He started doing political stuff for Alaska as a Democrat, but affiliated himself more as an independent. And he was able to win his election for, I believe, the state house in 2012 by around just 32 votes. It was one of the closest races in Alaska history. That said, this race allowed Democrats to have 1/4 a minority in the Alaska State House, and that's important because in Alaska there's a law stating that if your party has less than 1/4 of representation in the State House, then then the majority party is not obligated to give you committee assignments or to treat you as like an actual party. So without Jonathan Christ Tompkins, Democrats would not have been able to get the committee assignments that they wanted in the Alaska State Legislature. So he's just one of the people who played a really big part. Another person, Forrest Dumber, also played a big part at getting different people, just regular Alaskans, and then using them to then win in elections against Republicans. Now, this Alaska strategy that Dumber and Christ Tompkins are achieving and are trying to do is not very usual. It's pretty unorthodox in that they postulated that Democrats would not win in elections in Alaska, and that was true. They would not win in many elections in Alaska. They haven't won in a statewide race in Alaska for a very long time. That said, what they did postulate was possible was that if there were Democrats who affiliated themselves as an independent, then they would have a much higher chance at actually winning the election. And that kind of hypothesis did work out, and is actually in the middle of working out for Democrats who are affiliating themselves as independents. If we looked at the previous elections, we saw Al Gross, who was an independent, affiliated with the Democrats, but ran as an independent. He won 41.2% of the vote. Now, the New York Times does say he's a Democrat here, but in reality, when he filed as an independent. And that's one of the main strategies to actually do in Alaska for Democrats, and it's working for them. It's helping Alaska turn more purple. If we look at the 2016 Alaska Senate election in which involve Lisa Murkowski, and this is not the right one, so let me go to here. So if we look at the Senate elections that happened in Alaska, and we go over to Alaska, we saw Joe Miller, who was a libertarian, got more votes than the Democratic Party right here, Ray Metcalf. And then if you look at 2010 here, Joe Miller, as a Republican, got more votes than Scott McAdams, who was a Democrat. There were two Republicans who collectively got more votes than a Democrat. So it just shows how much Alaska does not like direct Democrats or Democrats who affiliate themselves as Democrats. But if we look at the state legislature as it currently is, we have a coalition caucus right here who has the majority in the Alaska State House. And this coalition caucus is made up of Democrats as well as coalition Republicans and independents or nonpartisan politicians. Meanwhile, you have 18 Republicans, and then you have one non-caucus Republican and then one non-caucus and Democrat. So as you can see here, the coalition caucus has the majority in the state house. The reason why the Democrats do not have a majority in the state Senate or independents is mainly because of the gerrymandering that happened with the Alaska Senate maps, and it's something that they can't really fix at this current moment, but they're inching towards, I guess, more or Alaska to be more and more purple. If we look at the past elections, this has translated to the presidential elections because the independent postulate that Tompkins hypothesized did apply to federal elections as well, and then it also, I guess, retroactively applies against Republicans in presidential elections, where Alaskan voters are voting more for Democratic Party tickets because they know that for an actual election or a presidential election, it's unlikely that you can get an independent candidate to actually win the presidential ticket. So if we look at the past several elections, you can see how it transferred from safe to lean. And this doesn't tell the whole story, but here we can go from 1976 forward, 22.3%, 27.9%, from here 36.8%. That was the peak, and then from there it started going down, 23.3 to 9.2. This was 1992 was just a special year because of Ross Perot. And then we have 17.5 for Dole in 1996, then 31 for George W. Bush, 25.5, and then from here, from 2004, it's just been going even more down, 21.5% for McCain. This is in the same race where Sarah Palin, the governor of Alaska, was the vice presidential nominee for the Republican ticket, and it was a decrease from 2004. And then if we look at 2012, shifted a lot to the left, all the way down to 14%, and then 2016 it's 14.7, but then Biden narrowed it much more in 2020 with a 10.1% deficit. So this is something that if the trends keep happening, if it keeps going down at this rate, then we could see in the 2028 or 2032 election, we could see Alaska flip for the Democratic Party. Now this is assuming that everything goes well for Democrats, and usually when a state does start to become narrow, the majority party or the party that has the advantage in the state starts to pay attention and then campaigns heavily. That said, I think that Alaska, it would be more important for Democrats to have Alaska not presidentially speaking, but rather in the Senate races, the governor's races, and as well as the state legislature. So every other race besides the presidential race, mainly because it's only 3 electoral votes. That said, 3 electoral votes is actually pretty influential for Democrats in the near term. If we just give Republicans Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Nebraska 2nd District, and as well as New Hampshire, it would give Democrats a majority just because of Alaska. If Alaska was flipped, then Republicans would have a 270 win to 268, but if Democrats have it, it would be a win for them. So that's, I guess, the importance of Alaska presidentially speaking, but it's more important in other races. As you can see here, there have been a lot of flips that in electoral districts that happened between 2016 or I guess 2014 was the last time Dan Sullivan was up for election. And if we zoom really into this, I don't know why Alaska makes its electoral districts so small, but as you can see, these are like the individual votes. They're around 8,000 to 10,000 total votes per electoral district. And as you can see, it seems pretty Republican in the Anchorage area. That said, it has gotten more and more for Democrats in the recent years. All of these districts used to be Republican. That said, it's gotten more Democratic and more independent for Al Gross. And that's because there are a lot of people, a lot of college-educated people in Alaska. There are more people in Alaska getting a college education, and there's I guess not completely a constant rule, but usually college-educated workers vote for the Democratic Party more than the Republican Party. So as a result, this has been fueling the growth in having Al Gross narrow the lead that Dan Sullivan had between 2014 in his first election and 2020 in his re-election. So those are just some things to note there. It's a long time away for Alaska to turn Democratic. It would be at the very least 6 years away before anything very influential starts to happen. That said, it's something that's happening right under our eyes, and you should not be surprised in the future if Alaska becomes incredibly competitive between Democrats and Republicans in Senate elections and in every other elections except for the presidential election. Also, don't be surprised if presidents start to visit this state in order to shore up voters for any contentious Senate election. So, that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. This video is now adjourned, and I'll see you in the next one.